In this session, it's 4-2. So experts and policy makers actually are to attend different sessions in the GKF, and this is a unique session because we do talk about civil society, and also because there's engagement civil society. I think they might share with us different sort of stories. We are given 70 minutes in total, so maybe we can fully take advantage of this time. And 20 minutes are given for each speaker. And let me correct. So 15 minutes are given to each speaker. Well, it's totally fine that you can go over that, but it'd be ideal if you finish within 15 minutes so that we can have 20-minute discussion time after that. And also we can have some dialogue with the floor as well. You're given 70 minutes, and first of all, I'll introduce to you the three panelists. On my left, maybe I can start with the person on my left. We have Mr. Lee Dae-hoon, who is very actively working on behalf of Peace Momo, although he will talk about it in his presentation. So he actually has done some research on early warning and peace movement. He has come up with very detailed ideas, and also he has been internationally active, and he is a representative peace activist as well. So we have Mr. Lee Dae-hoon as a panelist, and also we have Ms. Sarah Son. She is teaching at the University of Sheffield, but if you read the bio, she actually is doing lots of research on the victims and different sorts of topics which are not typically discussed in international relations. She's topping upon civic organization, and she's very good at Korean. We had lunch together, so I think she will understand what you're talking about in her heart. So we have another panelist, Sarah Son. And also, we have also team leader Lee Young-ah, who is manager of People's Solidarity for Participatory Democracy, Center for Peace and Disarmament. So for peace on the Korean Peninsula, she has been very active with civic organizations of home and abroad. So maybe you can talk more about what you do. We have Ms. Young-ah here. Please give them a big round of applause. So please stay tuned, and they'll be talking about the civic organization, but their points and messages might be a bit different. So I actually will ask them some common questions, and they will listen to questions from the floor. So maybe you can think about the roles we play by civil society. Maybe you can think about imagination and responsibility and possibilities as you listen to the speeches. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I think that Ministry of Unification have provided this kind of session in 4 years, so thank you very much for that. I wasn't here yesterday, but I also want to speak a little bit about the things discussed yesterday. So Minister Chung of Unification also talked about the peaceful unification, and I think this change in the perceptions of inter-Korean relations, and I think that the overall changes in the discourse will bring about a wider change, and I think we'll have a new and long-term perspective on unification. Of course, the civil society is not all even, so a lot of different organizations may have different thoughts. Some will be challenged, and for others, I think that it might be an opportunity. But a lot of the challenges and opportunities face us in the civil society. So I think that the peaceful two states or the peaceful unification is being talked about. I have a couple of questions. So this kind of peaceful states, what kind of concept does peaceful mean? Is it two Koreas? Do you think that having two different Koreas will truly be peaceful? Because at the moment, it's one country is against peace and one is pro-peace. So I think that I don't know if we can coexist together. And of the defense budget and the defense industry's prowess in the global stage. And if you think about that kind of situation, if we're talking about peaceful two states, what kind of peace and what kind of two states are we talking about? With the international society has transformed and the hegemony has fundamentally transformed into a new chapter. So under that backdrop, the Ministry of Unification, which had the target and objective of unifying the two Koreas, has to change fundamentally as well. And this was according to a recent report that I submitted. And this kind of peaceful two-state theory or two-state concept is being questioned. So for example, I would like to mention a peaceful cooperating states or a peaceful two states. So I think that there's a lot of multi-dimensional straps that are being placed on the peace of the Korean Peninsula. And the overall structure and South Korea's industries are much bigger and stronger compared to North Korea. So I think that in essence, I think we should not view it as two different countries, but I think we also need to think about a ministry that can think about all of these changes and transformations in the international society, as well as the differences or the gaps between the two Koreas. So the government and the civil society have to change alongside the changing times. For example, unification education has to become peace education for Northeast Asia. And humanitarian aid for North Korea has to be humanitarian aid for Asia and Northeast Asia. And I believe that defense also will not just be restricted to North Korea, and we also need to expand it to securing peace and stability in the Asia region. So the reality that we are facing now, we need to think about how the times have changed, and also because whether we are one of the participating nations in a war or whether we're trying to stabilize an insecure region. So one of the analysis that I have done also include how the Korean government is disregarding. I want to talk about these two documents. I haven't included it into my paper, but the UN Secretary General Guterres also mentioned that we need to adjust the defense budgets in the future, and he had a paper released on that. I think that this kind of warning will not be well reported in Korea. And the civil society also have a difficulty in understanding and communicating these messages because it's very wide, it's a wide spectrum of different aspects altogether. So Guterres, Mr. Guterres also is on a different pathway to the previous Secretary Generals because he thinks that we are in a turning point and at a threshold with defense industry and defense budget, and we are passing or crossing into a new frontier. That's why he is warning against it. And if you think about this year's report and the 2018 previous report, have stark differences. Both of these reports were not reported and communicated within Korea. If you think about the defense budgets of each countries, it's very different in terms of characteristics, even during the Cold War and in the past. I think that this is kind of like a snowballing as it rolls down. The volatility is so high that we cannot talk or block it from the democratic concepts that we had been discussing in the past. In order for a sustainable future, we all agreed on building a peaceful future. However, we're not able to move forward, and we aren't even making 20% of whatever we had agreed upon. And a lot of the countries are rather just deploying their investments and budgets into the defense industry. So that's what he is including within the report. And I think that the people who are living in Korea, Korean residents, are one of those members that are a part of this this kind of defense spending, an irresponsible defense spending. So whether it's direct or indirect, we have been complicit in this kind of defense spending, and we're also a country that is in one of the alliances. So under this backdrop, finding ways for a peaceful two-state theory, is it truly possible to do this, and do we really need to look at the fundamentals? So what I am proposing here is, for example, those people who are living in the seaside, if they receive information that there is a tsunami coming, that what they do first is they actually ring a siren to evacuate to higher ground. They also invest into technology to have sensors for any tsunami warnings. Then they also build evacuation shelters. There's the disabled, there are senior citizens. They also look into the accessibility measures of those people. So we look into the early detection systems of natural disasters. But we haven't looked into the same case scenario of increasing defense budget spending and the likelihood or possibility of a war being waged. So that's why we need to build an early detection system. And that's what I had been proposing for the civil society. So I think that people might think war is different from a tsunami, or war is different from an earthquake, war is different from a volcano erupting. You might think that way. However, for the people who are actually facing these events, it's all a disaster. But what's worse is those man-made disasters that have been brought on by increased investments and budgets and spending. Going back to my original concept, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we have been continuously increasing our budget. We are in alliance with a nuclear-powered country, and we're also waging in various different military exercises and practices along with that country in a 365-day, 24-hour routine. But we're on the other side, we're asking for peace and a peaceful agreement, a peace agreement, peace treaty. This is, I believe, going against our ideology and common sense. So a lot of the woke civil societies are looking into various different measures, but I think that Secretary General Guterres has released these reports, and he also mentioned that with increased defense spending, it's not that your country is more secure, but it's actually making people more anxious and nervous and unstable. And it's actually opening the doors to a war being able to erupt at any time. Peace movements and peace activities are always linked to a separate division of democracy or peace. In the 21st century, there are no more independent, unjust activities. I think that a lot of these activities has actually expanded and made some of the far rights more powerful. And this kind of anger, if people who have lots of anger vent up inside them don't have an area to vent out, they actually build it inside them. And I think that this kind of anger and unlimited defense budget spending are all interlinked with each other. And a lot of the countries that are increasing their budgets for defense are all OECD countries, also led by the UN Security Council countries. And they all, on the outset, declare that they are democracies. So, secondly, the peace activities of the civil society has to think about democracy, far right, disruption of the capitalism, and all of these have to be taken into consideration all at the same time. And this has to be voiced by the civil society to the government to be reflected into their policies. And if there is a ministry like the Ministry of Unification, I think that this kind of ministry needs to include and embrace new threats and risks. So the second suggestion that I would like to mention is that one of the challenges facing the civil society is that all of the threats that seem to be independent from each other are now interlinked, and it's a complex crisis that we're facing. And it's also an integrated crisis. And what I also want to mention is something that I had touched upon before. In a report that was released, it also talks about a paradigm shift in defense. For the UN states, I think the paradigm shift is something that has been ongoing for a very long time. President Moon Jae-in actually mentioned it at one point, but then it got replaced with something else and talking about more security. At first, when President Moon talked about it, I thought that finally someone is. But then on the next day, it was completely vanished. It evaporated. So in that report, I think that it's bringing that subject up again. I will just use one more minute of my time. So I guess that DPRK, or North Korea, is something that we need to take into account. Their security issues is something of a common security strategy. So we need to embrace their security concerns. So I think that true security, or human security, and comprehensive security is also embracing that of your competitors. I think that this kind of concept is not found in the Northeast Asian region. So security is, of course, always a regional issue. It's not a one-to-one issue because neighboring countries always have security issues. So this kind of region where the regional security is non-existent, we need to step up from the civil society to build that regional security concept. It's quite unfortunate that this kind of environment is being built all across the world, but in Northeast Asia, I think Korea is the one that's leading the group. And so that's why I think that civil society must step up and discuss these regional security issues as well. Thank you very much. So I think that everyone has understood your main points. Next.
마이크를 넘기.
I'm going to hand over the mic to Ms. Sarah-san.
Thank you very much for having me here today, and thank you to the interpreter who's going to have to translate my comments. I was not entirely sure exactly what I was expected to speak about today, so I decided to speak from an area of work that I know and have encountered over the years through my work on the Korean Peninsula. I'm an academic based in England and the UK, and my research looks at how civil society can contribute to deeper foundations for peace through things like identity work, engagement with victims of conflict or abuse, and something called anticipatory and participatory peace and justice work, which is something that happens alongside and in complement to dialogue and state-led engagement. So between 2014 and 2019, I worked here in Seoul for an NGO focused on documenting the situation in North Korea through research with North Korean defectors or escapees. Then I moved to the UK, and since then I have continued to engage with civil society in that particular field, the North Korean human rights field. I've also worked with the United Kingdom's all-party parliamentary group on North Korea. And then I've also ended up somehow also doing knowledge exchange work with non-governmental humanitarian aid field workers who regularly enter North Korea, but these are two very separate areas of work. And these activities have brought me into contact with people from across the political spectrum who seek to apply a wide range of skill sets to changing and improving the conditions in North Korea. But their long-term view and the connection to the theme of this forum, I think, is that they all want to facilitate peace and reconciliation between North and South Korea as a long-term goal. Having said all of this, I'm obviously a mere observer. I'm an outsider to the Korean context. My family name is Son, but it's not my family name, it's my husband's family name. And so I am always conscious that I am always learning and always observing from others. I also currently live in a country that is grappling with its own struggles over identity, governance, and trust in public life. And now more than ever, we are becoming very aware of the importance of robust, inclusive, democratic debate. And this has very much been a theme of this forum so far. So we can't predict. I also have a presentation. I think I'm the only person in the forum with a presentation, so hopefully it will be useful. But we cannot predict what form peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula will take, or when we might see an end to the division, the isolation, and the periodic animosity between the two Koreas. Over a century of colonialism, geopolitical division, war, and authoritarian government affecting both Koreas at different times have left many wounds. These are wounds that must be addressed before, during, and after any process of inter-Korean peace and reconciliation. In addition to this, in South Korea, consensus on how to approach the DPRK is, as we've heard many times at this forum, it's been very difficult because of the divided political environment. Civil society has a key role to play in dealing with both sets of challenges. First, helping communities reckon with the harms of the past, and second, creating the conditions of a dialogue that can, I think, help overcome entrenched political divides. So I'm going to be covering just four points briefly. So first, I just want to discuss why it is important that remedies for historical violence and injustice are integrated into plans for a peaceful future. Second, I'll explain why we need to create space for North Korean diaspora voices in that same planning for the future. Third, I'll consider how civil society can contribute to overcoming the ideological divide in South Korea in relation to North Korea policy. And finally, I'll say something about how anticipatory peace building by civil society may lay the social foundations for a more durable coexistence on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia. So across the world, civil society has been central in facilitating remedies for state violence and abuses after the dust of war has settled or there has been some kind of political transition, usually a democratization process. The work of civil society has often complemented or anticipated official efforts. In many places globally, from Latin America to Africa, Asia, and of course in Europe, truth, reconciliation, and justice processes have been supported by civil society organizations that have done crucial work like gathering evidence, fostering victim support, and participation in those processes. None of these processes have been perfect. They've been much studied by academics and policymakers alike. All of these processes faced political obstacles, uneven implementation, and criticisms from victims and observers. But civil society did play a vital role very often in sustaining memory, preserving evidence, and maintaining a sense of agency for survivors. This attempted to ensure that the foundations for reconciliation were intact, even when maybe governments hesitated or faltered or were struggling. There has been much debate since many of these processes ended or wound up about the successes and failures of peace processes and political transitions across the globe. Studies from research conducted with victims' organizations and civil society groups have found that participatory, locally grounded processes that address the needs of communities at the grassroots create more sustainable reconciliation post-conflict or post-transition. So in the South Korean context, there is experience of some of these processes to address 20th century injustices. In South Korea, as you'll all know, since democratization, civil society has worked to address the unacknowledged suffering of victims of wartime and post-war violence. And they've also called for justice for people who endured wide-ranging human rights abuses during decades of authoritarian rule prior to democratization in the late 1980s. In response, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Korea was set up by the government in the mid-2000s to address some of these past injustices. Before concluding its most recent investigation period earlier this year, the TRCK found that historical injustices perpetrated or supported by South Korean governments included unlawful killings and massacres, abusive forms of detention, forced labor, gender-based violence, as well as the big story of the last few months, which has been around international adoption practices of the authoritarian government era. Civil society organizations have also played a significant role in the work of the TRCK, including collaborating in the recovery of the remains of victims, documentation of survivor testimonies, providing archive material and oral histories to supplement state documents, while also doing things like organizing exhibitions, educational programs, and campaigns to raise awareness about what happened. Unfortunately, this work hasn't been easy. It's been difficult to implement their recommendations at times. The fact that it is a government-owned temporary entity that has really come and gone, depending on who has been in government at times, has limited its effects. This is unsurprising, I think, and matches the often disappointing outcomes of other mechanisms for processing the past in other places. One scholar who has studied what's called transitional justice or truth and reconciliation initiatives globally for many years has said that the principal mechanisms for addressing the past, such as these trials, truth commissions, do often tend to be driven first and foremost by the needs of the state. He says, a dominant legalism has seen mechanisms such as prosecution privileged over those that serve victims, such as reparation. Victims have little agency in such processes and participate as instruments of those mechanisms rather than on their own terms. By contrast, civil society-led localization of mechanisms helps to ensure that measures to address the past resonate with local needs and conceptions of justice. People will generally not engage with a process they do not understand or that appears to offer them no benefit. The work of processing South Korea's own uncomfortable past remains unfinished, and it is important that current and future administrations create the space for civil society to facilitate the continuation of that work. Turning now to North Korea. Extensive documentation and testimony collected by South Korean NGOs and international organizations has preserved the experiences of victims of grave human rights violations in the DPRK for 3 decades. And again, this is another topic that has come up a number of times across this forum. These archives provided the evidentiary basis for the 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry, which concluded that crimes against humanity had been committed in North Korea, and this investigatory work is ongoing. There has been much debate about the appropriate response to such findings. The international sanctions regime against North Korea continues to cause controversy and division. It perpetuates many of the struggles faced by North Koreans day to day, and it rests in significant part on opposition to the North Korean government's failure to observe international human rights norms. However, it's important that this documentation and monitoring work continue to both ensure there is a record for future generations, reminding them that such abuses should never be allowed to recur, but also for the victims of the North Korean diaspora today. My encounters with members of the North Korean diaspora has shown that when asked what justice meant to them, many prioritized recognition and inclusion, not only prosecution and punishment of perpetrators. They spoke about the discrimination they sometimes experience in South Korea, about the need for their children to have opportunities, and about wanting their stories to be remembered. My research and other studies from scholars in the UK, the United States, and in Korea, using ethnographic and community engagement with the North Korean diaspora, confirm that transforming trauma into constructive action offers positive meaning and contributes to post-traumatic growth among members of this community. The transformation among the North Korean diaspora and other victims of North Korean state policy is made possible almost entirely through their collaboration with civil society organizations. A report by the UK-based NGO Korea Future found in 2024 that North Korean defectors report higher levels of trust in civil society organizations than in government institutions. This is no doubt connected to the valuable work done by NGOs in empowering exiles from North Korea to play a leading role in preparing for the peninsula's future. This work is not about undermining inter-Korean engagement, but about preparing the social foundations that will make any inter-Korean peace more durable. Civil society initiatives, from oral history archives to museums and art exhibitions, provide spaces for therapeutic participation, a sense of purpose, and ways to give back to those still in North Korea. But they also give South Koreans and observers of North Korea an important window into the country and its people, helping to build understanding and empathy. Comparative experience shows that without such participatory mechanisms, peace agreements risk remaining elite-driven and fragile. By working with those who have suffered the consequences of violence and oppression, civil society ensures these communities are not forgotten and that reconciliation is rooted in social as well as political processes. I think the representative from the UN Human Rights Office, James Heenan, in the previous session mentioned or lists in the booklet the report of the UN Seoul Office on the foundations for an inter-Korean peace. I'm not going to read this slide for the sake of time, but the message here in this report, again, points to a key role for civil society organizations in sustaining memory, amplifying often marginalized victims' voices, and ensuring that peace and reconciliation processes are grounded in meaningful participation. And so this is true for both addressing South Korea's own past, as it is for the ongoing work of documenting the voices of the North Korean diaspora for the future. However, inclusive and participatory reckoning with the harms and injustices of the past is not enough on its own. We know that South Korea remains deeply divided over how to approach North Korea and how to frame the ongoing conflict. So civil society, therefore, has another role to play, helping to overcome the entrenched ideological division and fostering more inclusive visions of peace. Engagement with North Korea has long been shaped by polarized positions, split between progressive and conservative camps. And this often antagonistic framing has limited the possibility of sustained constructive debate. But democratic theorists remind us that durable peace requires something called agonistic dialogue, and I should have looked up how to translate that into Korean before this session, but it essentially means a willingness to engage in open contestation of values and visions that are vital to building resilient political communities without reducing them to partisan talking points. Agonistic debate recognizes that conflict and disagreement are inevitable in plural societies, that we shouldn't be afraid of this kind of debate. Rather than treating opponents as enemies to be defeated, it frames them as legitimate adversaries with whom we must continually negotiate shared futures. Such dialogue does not eliminate conflict, but it transforms it into a source of democratic energy, strengthening foundations for peace, as we heard yesterday from Professor Sandel. Civil society organizations are uniquely placed to create spaces for such dialogue, where sometimes uncomfortable questions about recognition, responsibility, and future visions can be debated. A parallel contribution that civil society can make is addressing the identity dimension of peace. Inter-Korean relations have long been filtered through a dualistic narrative of sibling and enemy, a mix of kinship and hostility. This duality has produced social hierarchies of belonging at the local level, where, for example, North Korean defectors often report feeling they are subordinate to South Koreans, despite coming from the same origins. Similarly, many victims of abuses at the hands of South Korea's authoritarian governments face decades of discrimination and exclusion from mainstream society, with profound intergenerational impact that continues to this day. Comparative research warns us that such hierarchies undermine social reconciliation, as seen in other places like post-apartheid South Africa. And these are important challenges to tackle ahead of the prospect of any broader reconciliation process. This work is something here that many of us here can directly initiate if we are working in universities, for example. I recently published this paper on my experience of using agonistic, pluralistic debate to foster a sense of critical compassion among students of international relations and politics looking at inter-Korean affairs. It isn't easy, and I still have much to learn, but I worry that such skills are in decline among our students, and that we have a responsibility to try to recover them. As educators, we have an ethical and moral responsibility to support our students to think critically and with compassion for others. I'm also aware of initiatives, and I've actually heard about more of these over the course of this forum, where there is work being done within civil society, such as this one, which took South Korean, North Korean refugee students to Europe to understand how former Soviet-ruled countries in Eastern Europe have worked to overcome their past through witnessing and debating historical memory. This often raises uncomfortable questions relevant to the Korean context, but the students report having many of their inherent biases and fears overturned, while developing a sense of hope that entrenched divisions can be overcome. So today, despite the potential for openness to dialogue with the DPRK in South Korea, it seems that North Korea's focus is much less on fostering positive inter-Korean relations now than in the past. And I think this makes the role of civil society much more vital. Such activity does not have to compete with inter-Korean engagement. Rather, it ensures that when political opportunities arise, we have the tools to make coexistence sustainable. And these are interventions that may take many years to bear fruit, but which prevent peace from being reduced to a purely diplomatic settlement. And I will leave it there. I do have some sources here if anyone is interested to screenshot those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I heard you a little bit too much, but I didn't tell you, but channel is number 3 for interpretation. I think you have already done that.
Now, Ms. Lee Young-ah. Hello, I am Lee Young-ah from the PSPD. I think that this session is organized to examine the major challenges faced by civil society in the process of building peace on the Korean Peninsula, and to explore the role of civil society in restoring inter-Korean relations. So I think that I will discuss how the society is being viewed and what kind of civil society activities has been done, and where and in what areas we wish to focus on. So with the segregation and the separation, I think the civil society has been working to restore the inter-Korean relations. Despite the suspension of inter-Korean talks after 2019, the relations have deteriorated, including the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's hostile policies towards the DPRK, strengthened trilateral military cooperation among the ROK, the US, and Japan, the DPRK's hostile two-state declaration, and its deepening military ties with Russia. So I believe that after President Lee Jae-myung, who has pledged to ease tensions and restore the inter-Korean relations, I think that the military hotline or the overall tensions in the borders are still ongoing. And in 2023, in April, they had severed the military hotline, and they remain completely severed. In his Liberation Day address on August 15th, President Lee declared, "We respect the current regime of the DPRK and we do not pursue any form of absorption unification and have no intention of engaging in any hostile acts." And in September 19th, he also announced plans to gradually restore this September 19th military agreement. And he also mentioned during this commemorative event that he does not have any intention, but there have been various different exercises with chorus militaries and also the Iron Mills exercise up until today. And I believe that the DPRK also have this in mind and that they are continuing with their military exercises. So Kim Yo-jong, Vice Department Director of the Workers' Party, also mentioned him in name, saying that, well, he's not a figure capable of changing the course of history. There was also the ROK US Summit on August 25th, and President Lee also proposed a meeting with Chairperson Kim Jong-un and President Trump. I think that the DPRK US Summit seems unlikely given the current state of affairs. It's difficult to expect any major breakthrough in the inter-Korean relations. So the civil society in South Korea continues to explore various avenues, but it's not easy. At this moment, we have to seek ways to ease tensions, coexist peacefully, and build trust to create the conditions conducive to restarting dialogue. Within the shifting international landscape, our approach and attitude must also fundamentally change. Rather than acting hastily, we must focus on laying the foundation for peaceful coexistence and trust building between the two Koreas. And from the civil society, before the new elections in May, we also suggested the Council of Civil Society Organizations for Inter-Korean Cooperation to prevent armed conflict and eliminate hostility, resolve nuclear threats, build a social consensus for peace and resolve ideological conflict, restructure the Ministry of Unification, and improve systems to revitalize inter-Korean exchanges. And if President Lee's declaration excluding the absorption, unification, and promoting peaceful coexistence is to go beyond just a symbolic gesture, it must be backed by laws and policies. So the government should adopt peaceful coexistence and non-absorption unification as the official national unification policy. And also, the National Assembly should support this through a resolution and enacting a basic act on inter-Korean relations. According to the Constitution, the two Koreas are a special relationship, while under the international law, both are UN member states. While long-term goals include unification, we also must redefine inter-Korean relations in a way that focuses on ending hostilities, encouraging coexistence, exchanges, cooperation, and citizen participation. That's why it should be formalized through a basic act on inter-Korean relations. So here it should include prohibiting acts of aggression and hostility, respecting mutual sovereignty, promoting peaceful coexistence and cooperation, fostering citizen participation and consensus on Korean Peninsula peace and unification, and work to resolve internal divisions within South Korea. And secondly, we should also build social consensus to address ideological conflict and achieve peace. As inter-Korean relations deteriorate, and especially since December 3rd insurrection and impeachment crisis, it's more urgent than ever to establish a stable dialogue space where citizens can participate in forming social consensus. From 2018 to 2023, the civil society had led 6 years of national dialogue on peace and unification. These deliberations demonstrated the possibility of reaching agreements on the future of inter-Korean relations and developed deliberative models, content, and nonpartisan civic platforms. And for the 6 years, more than 10,000 citizens participated in the discourse. Going forward, programs involving society groups, religious communities, students, and youth must be expanded to reach a social consensus on peace solutions. And legal frameworks such as amendments to the Inter-Korean Relations Development Act or enactment of a basic act must institutionalize public dialogue and participation. And furthermore, there's also an urgent need to shift from the traditional security and ideology-focused unification education to peace education that emphasizes coexistence. And we also need related laws and systems that must be restructured. In order to vitalize the inter-Korean activities, although cooperation is currently suspended, we need to revise the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act. And I believe that we need to continue on with humanitarian projects regardless of the political and military situation. A new law such as the Act on Humanitarian and Symbiotic Cooperation with North Korea to be considered. To conclude, I want to share the results of a workshop held in April where peace activists and researchers reflected on the future direction of the peace movements in the wake of the December 3rd insurrection. In fact, during the December 3rd insurrection, we pointed out the issues surrounding the division and that we looked at how there was interventions since the decisions were made largely at the state level, and we also found it shocking. A lot of the participants during the workshop mentioned that the inter-Korean relation, such as division, is affecting or is not in relation to people's everyday experiences, so it's difficult to create relations, and that peace-related agendas are highly influenced by international dynamics, and that the civil society doesn't have any way to intervene. And with the long-term division over the 70 years, has become a normal situation. And while many feel that there is a constant threat of the division, they do not believe that they can realistically create change. It's important to fully recognize the current situation, but participants also caution that there is a helplessness felt among the citizens. So there needs to be an existing effort to connect peace issues to the citizens' daily lives. And The existing peaceful unification methodology is no longer viable. There were a couple of issues that were discussed: promoting autonomy and coexistence, fostering social integration, embracing difference and diversity, encouraging dialogue and consensus building, broadening the scope of peace movements, and enhancing the peace sensitivity to address political polarization and hate issues. In a polarized society, recognizing differences and building integration through dialogue was identified as a key task. And even when we have different opinions, we have to avoid hostility, acknowledge and respect differences, and establish stable spaces for dialogue to form the foundation for social consensus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please give another big round of applause for the three panelists.
So, listening to what they've shared with us, I was thinking about the definition of civic society and what roles they have to play, and actually came to think about these topics in a different way. Criticism of what the government is doing and complementing the roles the government actually cannot play. Maybe it goes beyond that. They are to suggest a new vision and the dream. And sometimes it might compete against the government, and sometimes it might actually go beyond the national border to be engaged for a new society on the global stage. And I actually have come to realize the definition of the civil society in a broader sense. So today's date is 19th of September. In 2018, if maybe you might think about Inter-Korean agreement happened a decade ago, the same day. In 2005, though, the six-party talk, 9/19, actually September 19 agreement also there. So there are two agreements. So it was actually the first multilateral agreement, multi-six parties, but then these actually were not well kept. Only agreements were made. So how to stick to what has been agreed upon, that's another big task we need to think about. We don't have much time, but they have discussed lots of topics, but then I don't want to do any distortion or shrinkage of what I've said, but let me actually try to give a summary of what they have shared with us. Please come to think about it, thinking of time or space, or venue, or the entities who is in charge. So what time are we living in? So many years ago, because of the threat of nuclear weapons, there was doom's clock. That was what we talked about. And listening to what Mr. Lee Dae-un said, as you see from Russian-Ukraine war, we see robot drones and many things else, which are all interconnected. We are living in the era of interconnected crisis, where the threats are more multi-layered, where the timing of crisis can come earlier than what we thought. It's affecting what we think. So there might be far-rightist that is fully active, and there might be different conflicts. So we're living in this very era like that with complexities. One more thing, thinking about what Sarah Son said, the past and the present and the future are all intermingled, but then the remains of the past, we remember them, but to heal, we have to actually think about a joint future, a common future where we all can trust each other, where we think about future partnerships, and we think about the common identities, memories, and healing of the scars. And also, one step further, the human rights. We talk about human integrity or dignity itself. So it can actually go in line with one's identity, which is very forward-looking idea. So through the power in the future, we can actually address the scars of the past. And listening to what Ms. Lee Young said, making societal consensus, the process itself actually was possible. So in the future, that's going to be possible, and it's also another axis of the time, the trust of the civic society. Regarding the space, though, I mentioned the six-party talks of 2005, though, and Mr. Lee, he actually, no matter as what, like as we talk about two-state theory, we have our own destiny on the Korean Peninsula. And geopolitically speaking, it is all aligned with Northeast Asia. So maybe inter-Korean issue can be looked upon in terms of the Northeast Asian issue. It's more of a spatial topic. I might agree with it 100% though, but there's a little bit of a skepticism because for the past 30 years, I have worked on it, but consensus can never be made among Northeast Asia. Maybe it can brought down to Southeast Asia as well, so that we can think of Asia vision. So six-party talks, all the minority countries, Mongolia, Taiwan, actually leave. And if you do actually exclude South Korea, I mean they're all actually major powers. Anyway, the exception might be Japan, though. Anyway, thinking about the issues of Korean Peninsula, how are we going to divide the space of the zone itself? I think that was a very thought-provoking idea, and we should go beyond this matter to talk about cross-border, cross-nations, to take full advantage of the creativity of civic society in addressing, so to speak, Korean Peninsula topics. And also in terms of the subjects, those in charge. As we think about citizens, the civic society, this is very complicated. And also we have lots of issues, like South-South issues. Actually, well, there's a very big split within South Korea. And we've had 2 impeachments, and we have all the long-lasting scars after impeachment, and things are really tough to address. And so like Sarah said, we also have North Korean immigrant issues. We're defected from North Korea. We have multicultural immigrant issues. And also we have had that very bad incident in Georgia. So how are we going to overcome all these hierarchical societal issues? I mean, these issues cannot be addressed by government alone. Just like Sarah-san said, I mean, use these 2 words, accountability and responsibility. No matter what, civic society must have accountability. It's not only the responsibility of the government alone, so we need to think about accountability and responsibility of the civic society, not only imposed upon South Korea, but something to be shared among global citizens, so we think about the future partnerships, and we can share the memories of the future as well. So maybe future commons, so we actually can continuously generate future commons, which is like peaceful narrative of the future. So we can share the narrative together where we see a way forward, we see a vision. A vision is important because that's showing us the way to go forward. We know where to go. So that I think is very important. So I think I arbitrarily made a summary of what these 3 panelists have talked about. But your insights have been very important, and they definitely give us food for thought on what's going on at this point in time, and how we do look at the regional topics as well. Also, it makes me think about identity, integrity, and also it had made a very good diagnosis of the crisis. Very short, but very critical indeed in the messages.
10분 남았.
So we have 10 minutes left. So I did prepare some questions as well, but I would like to first gather the questions from the floor, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and then the 3 panelists will be able to answer for the remaining 5 minutes as well. So I think that it's also a good time for you to reflect. If you, among the panelists, have any questions or comments, that's also welcome. Mr. Lee also mentioned, but I'm actually speaking just because I'm giving you a little bit of time to reflect. Okay. So I am a researcher and also a supporter of the PSPD. So thank you very much for your presentations. I think it's always like hitting a wall because the civil society also overcame the insurrection on December 3rd and many difficulties, but a lot of the North Koreans, I think, that aren't able to get this kind of leisure. But I also wanted to ask about what about the defectors? But in fact, the defectors, their voices aren't heard to our society, and even when they defect from their country, I think that it's always a very difficult situation. So I always try to, because it's very difficult for us to research into the civil society of North Korea, so I'm always assuming what they might want. I think sometimes that's more accurate because I think I'm kind of pushed up against a corner because there's no other options. But what do you think about having a partner society in North Korea? I don't know who could answer, but anyone? Okay, I'll take maybe 2 more questions from the floor.
여러분들 한번 생각해 보시고요.
Maybe panelists, you can think about the questions. Yes.
So Mr. Lee also mentioned the Secretary General's defense report from Secretary General Gutierrez. So from peace activities, we have done a lot of campaigns related to it, and we also want to revert those funds to the people who really need it most. But I think that worldwide, all the countries are increasing their defense spending and defense budgets. And I think that they're competing with each other. President Lee also has increased next year's defense budget by 8.2%. But in terms of the peace activities, I think that it's very difficult for us to pursue any peace activities or peace movements. So deterrence of nuclear armament or cutting back on defense spending is what we need. But I think that by increasing the defense budget, this is creating a much more dangerous situation and environment. How can we, under this circumstance, find a way for peace? Because it's not just one country, but it's also most of the countries all over the world. So what can we do as a civil society? I mean, I think that it's more of a political workshop. Or any questions from the floor?
마이크가 있습니다.
Yeah. Please use a microphone for translation. I am active in Unification Women Organization. Sarah Son's remarks are very resonating, I think. So, thinking about the roles of the civic society, maybe prejudice against North Korean refugees and belittlement against them actually need to be improved and corrected, because this is one potential of conflict when we are unified in the future. So hopefully we need to eradicate prejudice against North Korean immigrants. Maybe we can come up with some program for them to mingle well within the Korean society. Thank you so much for giving us food for thought, Sarah Son. And thank you so much.
And Ms. Lee, thank you very much for your presentation. And you also talked about some of the elements that we need for future peace movements. But I agree with you fully. However, in order to do this, I think that the government and the public sector also needs to support us in our activities in terms of the administrative and financial aspects. However, from the unification civil societies, we have to question whether the Ministry of Unification truly wants unification. Because, for example, in the process of doing projects or enacting projects, it's always the same method, and it goes back revisiting past experiences. So that's why we always run into the same problems all the time. So whether, I mean, the process is streamlined or evaluating each civil society in their actions and providing incentives according to the evaluations. I think there needs to be a structure or a system in order to promote peace movements. Thank you very much. All right, I think that we will have to stop the question portion here. I think that we're also recording for internal use as well. So I hope that the ministry will be able to take these considerations to heart. You also mentioned a question that it's very difficult to approach North Korean residents, and we have to always guess what they want. And so how can we collaborate? That was the first question. And the second, it's about the Secretary General Gutierrez's defense report, but how do we go against the trend, and how do we effectively ward off these trends for the peace movement? And the third was about the supports, right? I think that it will be your final concluding comments in line with the answers of the questions. So we'll give you maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds per person. So for the UN report, there was a convention on the banning of armaments and regarding the treaty, but I was there, and a lot of people actually presented saying that let's not limit the development of AI weaponry or AI robots. I think that that's also recognizing that defense and weaponry and the industry itself is growing at a rapid pace, that it's opening up an era of unlimited competition for defense spending. Korea is actually leading in the competition, and there's no limits either. Whether it's a democracy or not, that we are mired in this kind of situation is problematic. So to that respect, we do need to pursue many peace movements. You talked about weaponry and nuclear weapons as well. There's a lot of movement or rapid growth of the voices that are calling for nuclear armament in Korea. So Japan and Korea are already tentative nuclear armed countries or nuclear states, because this potentially we can be armed with nuclear weapons. So we do need to think about the public consensus as well as the government's stance. We're at the tipping point, but I think the wealth as well as the military power, and if we're actually topped off with nuclear weapons, I think that that could become the starting point of the destruction of the world. So I think that this is truly a time when we should be ringing the warning signs. Well, you never know when UN Secretary General Guterres will step down, but considering what he has mentioned in the report, I think that it's very important for us to be aware of it. It said mutually reinforced impact. So there's a lot of complex, interlinked risks and threats that are going on. And this kind of competitive defense budgets is mutually competitive. And it will create destructive impacts. So we believe we should prioritize this as our first agenda. And we also have to have a critical eye. The first to dismantle any kind of nuclear power. The Minister Chung also mentioned during his National Assembly questions, he was asked whether he will remain complacent with the provocations of the North. He actually answered, we have 66 trillion for our defense budget, but for North Korea, it's an annual budget of 40 trillion. So for North Korea, our being itself is a threat. That's how he answered. Because threats is always imminent and it's always around us. So it's a mutual threat because we need to know our enemy, but we need to also know in order to know ourselves and our enemy at the same time. So we need to dismantle any threats, and we need to reconfigure those threats into becoming a non-threat in order to fend off any domino effect of threats. Thank you. So is it okay if we use up 2 minutes of your time? So I'll ask you to complete in 1 minute.
Very quickly, I won't address all of the questions that were raised, but just one comment just to say that in response to the question about North Korean refugee programs and support, that there are lots of programs and support both in South Korea but also for the diaspora in the UK, where we have quite a large population of North Korean escapees relative to other countries, in Europe and the United States as well. And a number of those in the diaspora who've left South Korea over the years have reported feeling pressure from the settlement system here to, I suppose, become ideal South Korean citizens, which sometimes they feel is a threat to their identity as North Koreans, which they're not always, they don't always desire to disregard or to shed completely. So it's a very complex identity question. But equally, North Koreans from many studies I've read by South Korean researchers have also reported being very proud to be Korean in the broadest sense, whether they live here, whether they live abroad in other countries as well. And they're a very important and powerful resource, I think, that we should be looking to support as much as we can.
네, 저도 빨리 마무리하겠습니다. 사실 한반도뿐만
So not only the Korean Peninsula, but the international society is also very, unfortunately, faced with threats. And if you look at the international order and international law, all of them are talking about the wars. In Gaza, even with a mass genocide of 65,000 people, none of us are doing anything that's going to completely turn the tables around. So that's why I think that it's a desperate times. For our society, I think that we still need to find the ways where we can make a difference, not only Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia. We need to build trust, with North Korea, with internal and external forces, and how we will combine and integrate all of these voices to provide any assistance. Thank you very much. Thank you to our interpreters, and thank you to all of our audiences, and thank you to all of the panelists. I'm sorry for making you hurry. Thank you very much.